A C# program is organized into three different parts: a file, a project, and a solution. This can be a little confusing for beginners, but it's pretty straightforward. A file is just a single file that contains code, just like a Word document with your history essay. A project is a collection of files that are all related to each other, so maybe that's like a folder with all the Word documents for your history class. And a solution is a collection of projects that are all related to each other. That would be the USB drive that has all the folders for all of your classes. Just make sure you don't lose it, because there's no way your history teacher believes that's what happened. We're going to make a solution for each assignment, like the Module 4 programming assignments, for example, and then within that we'll have a project for each program we write. Many of my assignments have Part A and Part B, so those will be our projects within the Module 4 programming assignment solution. The way you create your solution and projects will depend on what IDE you're using. I'm using Visual Studio Code on a Mac, but it will work the same on Windows or Linux. Before we create our program in VS Code, we need to decide where we're going to save our work and create a folder there. The location doesn't have any impact on me when I grade it. You're going to zip up the files and submit them, and it doesn't matter where they were on your computer. Of course, you do need to be able to find them later. My suggestion is to make a folder in your Documents directory called CIS 162AD or whatever your class is, and keep all your work in there. Wherever you put it, make sure you back it up regularly, and please don't save all your work on a USB drive. I always feel bad when students lose them, but me feeling bad doesn't really help with the 0 you're going to get. In VS Code, we can now create our project. Click the icon for the Explorer panel, and you'll see a few different choices to get started. If you see a list of files and folders instead, it means you already have something open. Just go to the File menu and select Close Folder. Make sure you're not just closing a file. VS Code considers a folder to be a project, so you have to close the old folder to start a new project. Click the button to create a .NET project. You can also go to the gear icon and select the command prompt, and when that opens, type .NET, and that search will find the option to create a new project. If you don't have the option to create a .NET project, it means you don't have the right extension or extensions installed, so you need to go back and look at the resources for getting it set up, then come back and you can move on from here. Now you'll need to select the type of project you want, because C# can be used for a wide variety of things. We're going to pick the console app template. If you don't see it, just type console in the search box and the filter will help you find it. Next, it wants to know where to create the project, so navigate to the folder you just created and select that. Finally, it'll ask for a name for the project. Here's where we have to be careful. It says it's asking for the project name, but it's really going to give the solution and the project this same name, and we want those to be different in the end. It's easier to change the project name later, so we're going to put our solution name here. Remember that this solution is a collection of related projects, and this is where we can identify the assignment we're working on, Module 4 Labs or whatever it is. Right now, this is probably Module 1 Labs for you, so that's what I'll use, but name it for whatever assignment you're working on. Then hit Enter to create it. VS Code will take a moment to create this folder and the parts of the project that go inside of it, and then it'll open. Down here at the bottom, I'm going to expand a panel called Solution Explorer. This gives us a really useful look at our entire solution. In fact, I find it more useful than the folder view up at the top most of the time, so I'm going to collapse that so we don't get confused. That folder view shows just the files as they are on your disk. The Solution Explorer is a visual representation of that solution and project structure that you've created. The top is our solution, and right under that is our project, but as I mentioned, they've been given the same name. So I'm going to right-click on the second one, which is the project, and rename that. We can think of our project name as the program we're writing, but here's where I don't really want a project name like Module 3 Lab Part A. In programming, we try to use names that describe what something does. So if you're writing a program that calculates the area of a circle, you might name your project Circle Area Calculator or something like that. That one's a little long, but it is descriptive. For this first project, I'm going to name it first program. And within that project is our file. There's some other stuff here, but that's all we need to worry about. The default file name is program.cs, and the .cs stands for C#. You can change the file name if you want, but make sure you keep the .cs at the end. Go ahead and click on that file name to open it in the code editor. By tradition, the first program we write in a new language is code that outputs hello world. So the template actually starts there. I'm going to go ahead and delete that so we can begin from scratch. To produce output, I'm going to use something called the write method. The statement to use that begins with the word console, followed by a period, and then the word write. The first lesson in programming is that details matter. Everything has to be spelled correctly, and everything is case sensitive. So console has to begin with a capital C, and write has to start with a capital W. VS Code uses color coding to show that it recognizes what we're typing, and if it doesn't recognize something, it'll underline it in red. In order for the write method to output something, it has to know what we want it to print. To give it that information, we put parentheses on the end. In the parentheses, we can put quotation marks and then whatever the message is that we want to display. So, hello C# goes in the quotes. Again, details matter. The message has to have quotes on both sides, at least for now, and the parentheses have to be there. In C#, a statement ends with a semicolon, a lot like a period at the end of a sentence. If I'm missing that, I'll have a little red underline. I could try to run the program by clicking the white start button up here, but because of the error, it can't run. This pop-up we get is really important, especially because we're all kind of conditioned to just instantly close these kinds of things without paying much attention. It's saying that my code can't run, and it's asking if I want to run an old version of the code. In this case, I don't really have any old code because I just created the program, but even if I did, selecting yes is a really bad idea. If I hit yes, it's not running what I've got on the screen, it's running something I did before, and that's really confusing. You always want to stop if you see this pop up and figure out what's going on. In this case, I'm missing my semicolon at the end of the line. When I add that, my underline goes away and I can try running again. Pressing this button is actually telling VS Code to compile my work and send it to the runtime to execute. Our program runs in a panel at the bottom of the screen. First, there's a big chunk of text that is the command VS Code is using to compile and run our code, and under that is our output. It kind of gets buried in there, and then when the program is done, it actually gives us a command line. If you're familiar with Bash or PowerShell, things like that, this is familiar to you. If not, just think of it as a way to interact with the computer using text commands. This really isn't a very impressive program, but if you're new to coding, this is kind of a big deal. You've just created your first computer program. With that under our belts, let's try a couple more things with this code. I can add another line with a different message, so I'll put console.write, welcome to CIS 162 AD. I'll run the program again, and now I see both messages in the output window. But notice that the messages are sort of jammed together on the same line. The write method doesn't hit enter at the end of the line, the cursor just waits until we output more. Since we often want to output a message and then move to the next line, there's another method called writeLine. It works the same way as write, so I'll just change that write to writeLine and run it again. And now I'm seeing those two messages on separate lines. Another thing we need to know right away is how to use code comments. Comments are notes that we put in our source code. They get ignored by the compiler, so we can put whatever we want in them and it won't affect the way our program runs. To write a comment on one line, just put 2 slashes. Visual Studio Code shades it green to show that it's a comment, and everything after those slashes just gets ignored. If I put a comment at the end of a line of code, the compiler will look at everything before the slashes, but ignore everything after the slashes. If I want to write a comment that uses more than one line, I can indicate that with a slash and an asterisk, or a star, and then I can end it with an asterisk and a slash. We always put a multi-line comment, or what I call a comment block, at the top of our program to provide some information about what it is and what it does. When you're coding for an assignment, I have a very specific format for it, and you should check the directions to see what that is. But even outside of class, the best practice is to describe the program a little. And now I just want to run this again to make sure I haven't messed up anything. This first program is done. Before we move on, we should make sure that the formatting of our code is correct. VS Code can help with that, but we have to configure it. Down in the bottom left corner, click the gear icon and select Settings. The Settings panel has a bunch of common stuff at the top, but because there are so many different things you can configure, it's easiest to just use the search bar. I'll search with the word Format, and one of the first things it finds is a setting called Format on Save. I'll check this box, and now anytime I save my file, VS Code will clean up my indenting and whitespace a little. And it saves automatically every time I run it, so it should keep my code looking good. The compiler doesn't care how well we format our code, with just a couple little exceptions, but the person reading your code does care. There are very definite conventions for how it should look, and it's important that we follow those. Okay, so our program is finished and we've cleaned up the formatting. But many of my assignments require two separate programs. So we need to know how to correctly add a project to this solution, and there's one other thing I need to show you along the way. A program in C# is actually a little more complicated than that first example we just made. A program has to have something called a class, and that class has to have a method called main, and that's where the program starts running. In order to make it easy for us to get started, we use something called top-level statements, which is what we did before we just started typing our code. And then the compiler creates all that other stuff for us. But we need to understand what that other stuff is, and we need to understand what we're looking at when we see examples online that don't use top-level statements. Before we create a new project, we need to be careful about what we already have open. When we created our first project, we didn't have anything open, so it created a solution for us as well. Sometimes that's what we want, and sometimes it's not. If I want to close everything so I can start with a new solution, I need to go to the File menu and say Close Folder. In this case, I want to add a new project to my current solution, so I got to make sure I have that solution open first. So there's a recent file list here. I could just click on it there. I can also just go to the File menu and say File, Open Folder, and then navigate to wherever I have it saved. Select the folder that holds your entire solution and open that, and I'll be right back where I started. With this solution open, I have a couple ways I can create a new project. If I go to my Solution Explorer and I right-click on the solution name, which is going to be up here at the top, that's going to add my new project to the existing folder. I can also use something called the command prompt, which text-based people tend to like. Go down to this gear at the bottom left, select command prompt, and I type .NET project. One of the choices will be to create a new .NET project. Either way works the same. I have to make sure I'm selecting a console app just like we did before, so I'll search for console to find that. And we want a nice descriptive name for our project, so even though I know this is the lab part B, I'm not going to call it that. I'm going to call it song lyrics because that's what the program does. The directory is going to be inside the folder for our current solution, which is great, so I'll hit enter there. And the first time we just clicked through this part that says create project, but I want to check out those template options. One of the template options is do not use top-level statements. And so I'm going to click on that one and change it to true just for this example. And now I'll go ahead and create the project with those options. VS Code will create all the files it needs, and our new project will show up in our Solution Explorer right underneath our first one. And if I expand that, I can see that there's a program file in there. If I click the program file, I can see that default template. We'll look at that in a moment, but notice that there is a tabbed interface here, so I can switch back and forth between my two programs. This is what a C# program actually looks like. With top-down statements, this is all hidden from us and generated when we compile. It looks a little confusing, but it's really no big deal. Before I get too carried away, I'm going to go ahead and put my comment block at the top because that's easy to forget. And now I can take a look at this template. So my code that I want to run goes inside this main method. The main method is kind of the entry point for my program. When the .NET framework is given a C# program to run, it looks for a method called main, and that's where it starts executing. The curly braces are used to denote what part of the code is the main method. So as long as I write my code between those two curly braces, right where this template line of code is, I'm fine. It's just the same as a top-level statement program. I'll go ahead and write some code to output a song lyric. And I can run this to make sure it's working okay. When I click that Run button, it's going to run whatever file I have open, so I can use that tabbed interface to switch between the two and run whichever one I'm working on. There's really no significant difference between these two ways of writing your program, and as far as I'm concerned, you can use either one. What I expect is that most students are going to use top-level statements because it's a little less confusing and you just jump right in and start writing code. But later in the course, we'll want to organize things into classes and methods ourselves, so we'll be seeing more of that older style down the road. And the truth is, top-level statements are still a fairly new feature in C#, so a lot of the code that you see out there in videos and web pages and books is using that old approach. And I want you to understand what you're looking at when you see those examples. And with that, these two programs are done and they're ready to be turned in, which we'll take a look at in a separate video.